Quantock Hills in Somerset, England's first area of outstanding natural beauty. 38 square miles of moorland, deep valleys with winding streams and sweeping views across the Bristol Channel to Exmoor and the Somerset Levels. William Wordsworth wrote to his friend Samuel Coleridge about the beauties of the Quantocks when he says, "Upon smooth Quantock's airy ridge we roved, unchecked, or loitered mid her sylvan coombs." This is the village of Nether Stowey in Somerset, nestling below the Quantock Hills, and I am walking down Castle Street, being careful not to fall into what the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge called the beloved gutters. This is the site of the old market cross and marketplace, but now we've got Quantock tea rooms and post office here. And then we'll walk up Lime Street to where Coleridge's cottage is still. This is the cottage where Coleridge and his wife Sara and their 3-month-old son Hartley moved on the last day, 1796. The cottage had been up over 100 years, and by the time they moved in, it was not in a very good state. Dilapidated and the thatch rotten, letting in the draughts and the fires smoking. In fact, Coleridge called it a little hovel. Doesn't look like that now though. Yet the family lived here for 3 years, and it was here that Coleridge wrote his best-loved poems, such as The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Kubla Khan. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was born in 1772, the youngest of 10 children of the vicar of Ottery St Mary in Devon. In 1794, Coleridge met Sara, the sister of the poet Robert Southey's fiancée, Edith Fricker, who he married in 1795, the family moving the following year to Nether Stowey, where Coleridge's friend Thomas Poole gave them this rent-free house and paid for their debts. Coleridge Cottage is a small house, and it was even smaller in Coleridge's time. When the family arrived on that dark December day in 1796, it was draughty and dirty and overrun with mice. Yet it was here that Coleridge wrote some of his great poetry, and in the welcome parlour entertained his friends, Charles Lamb the writer, John Cottle the publisher, Tom Wedgwood the potter, and of course William and Dorothy Wordsworth. It was in this room that the Romantic poetry movement started with Coleridge and Wordsworth's collection, Lyrical Ballads. This is the kitchen, but this is not the size of the kitchen that Sara would have had to be working in. This was built on afterwards. She was in a lean-to, which was probably coming out at about where I'm standing, and she had to do all the cooking and the chores and the washing, with the chickens from the garden running about. And one of the things she made a lot of, in common with many people, were pies. But she didn't cook the pies here. She didn't have the oven to do that. She would take them down to the local baker for the cooking, and in common with many other households. And all the pottery and china was of the sort that would have been used in those times. The earthenware, quite heavy stuff. The fire would have been in the family room, like this. And this is a small version of what was used. Those are representing chickens, so the chickens would have been cooked in front of the fire and would have had a tray underneath to collect all the fat. And then the fat was made into candles. And the candles were stored in here to keep them away from the mice, even though they could sometimes get in here. Coleridge wrote to a friend that they were going to be very happy here, raising his small child to be close to nature, and that he would grow the fruit and the vegetables and the corn enough to feed all his family. And I'm sure that's what he intended. But the reality was that he wanted to write poetry and to walk with his friends. And so Sara spent her time in the kitchen working really hard so that he could write his poetry. It was on a cold and icy night in 1798 that Coleridge wrote his poem Frost at Midnight, sitting beside the fire in the second parlour in the cottage at Nether Stowey and watching his 2-year-old son sleeping in his cradle. The frost performs its secret ministry unhelped by any wind. The owlet's cry came loud, and hark again, loud as before. The inmates of my cottage, all at rest, have left me to that solitude which suits abstruser musings, save that at my side my cradled infant slumbers peacefully. 'Tis calm indeed, so calm that it disturbs and vexes meditation with its strange and extreme silentness. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs. This would have been the Coleridge's bedroom. The Coleridges had very little money, no money at all for luxuries, and so everywhere was very sparsely furnished. This is the second bedroom, which would originally have been used to house their friends, but now is filled with Coleridge memorabilia. Those years from 1797 to 1800 at Nether Stowey were a difficult time for Sara, as she had to cope with running the house and looking after the children. And another problem for Sara was the Wordsworths. Constrained by domestic tasks, Sara could not take part in the talks and long walks with them that Coleridge enjoyed, and she found it hard to get on with Dorothy Wordsworth. Sara's clothes at the foot of the bed have been left there by Dorothy. She used to borrow Sara's dresses to go walking with Coleridge and William, and not content with despising the clothes for being out of date, she once even returned a dress muddy at the hem. I am in the garden behind the cottage, which rises up from it, so that looking down onto the cottage. Originally it would have been bigger than what we see now, and it connected with Coleridge's friend Tom Poole. It connected with his garden, so that Coleridge would quite often walk out of the garden to meet up with his friend. And here Coleridge was really happy being out in nature and attempting to grow the fruit and vegetables that were needed to feed the family. A delight comes sudden on my heart, and I am glad as I myself were there. Nor in this bower, this little lime tree bower, have I not marked much that has soothed me. Pale beneath the blaze hung the transparent foliage, and I watched some broad and sunny leaf, and loved to see the shadow of the leaf and stem above dappling its sunshine. And that walnut tree was richly tinged, and a deep radiance lay full on the ancient ivy, which usurps those fronting elms, and now with blackest mass makes their dark branches gleam a lighter hue. We're now back in Castle Street, and this is Poole House, the home of Thomas Poole, who was the owner of Nether Stowey's tannery, and he was a philanthropist and a benefactor, and let the Coleridge family live rent-free in their cottage. Thomas Poole, as well as supporting the Coleridge family, started a free school in the village, and that's now become the library. He also supported the Sunday school movement, set up a savings bank and a women's friendly society. This would have been the entrance to the tannery, which was the family business that made the money for Thomas Poole to be able to be a philanthropist and a benefactor. This is one of the routes that Coleridge would have taken to go to Alfoxden to see the Wordsworths, and they in turn to visit him in Nether Stowey. At the top of Castle Street is Stowey Castle. This is a Norman Motte and Bailey castle, built in the late 11th century by Alfred d'Espagne from Normandy. The castle went through a number of owners, ending up with the Audley family in the 15th century, by which time it had fallen into disuse. Standing here and looking around at the view, we can imagine Coleridge telling us, "Now, my friends, emerge beneath the wide, wide heaven, and view again the many-steepled tract, magnificent, of hilly fields and meadows, and the sea. Sea, hill and wood, this populous village, sea and hill and wood, with all the numberless goings-on of life, inaudible as dreams." These are the ancient tracks that Coleridge and William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy walked between Nether Stowey and Alfoxden. Quite often it would be just Dorothy who walked with Coleridge. She wrote in her journal in 1798, "4th of February, walked a great part of the way to Stowey with Coleridge. 5th of February, walked to Stowey with Coleridge, returned by woodlands." In old times, this was known as a hidden passage. The trees grew up and came over and met, and they're holly trees too, so it would have been quite secretive coming along here. This is Holford Glen, just below Alfoxden, where William and Dorothy were staying. And in her journal, Dorothy writes, "William and I, in a wander by ourselves, found out a sequestered waterfall in a dell formed by steep hills covered with full-grown timber trees." And this is the dell that Dorothy was writing about, Holford Glen. We can hear the waterfall, but we cannot access it anymore. Coleridge wrote about Holford Dell in his poem, "This lime tree bower, my prison." The roaring dell, o'er-wooded, narrow, deep, and only speckled by the midday sun, where its slim trunk the ash from rock to rock flings arching like a bridge. That branchless ash, unsunned and damp, whose few poor yellow leaves ne'er tremble in the gale, yet tremble still, fanned by the waterfall. This is Alfoxden, the country home where William and Dorothy moved to in July 1797, in very marked contrast to the home that Samuel and Sara Coleridge had, the cramped, dark cottage and damp in Nether Stowey. The house is quite dilapidated now. It was a hotel, then it was empty for 9 years, and now it has been bought and for a Buddhist retreat centre. So they're working very hard to restore it so that then they can have the retreats here to enjoy nature and landscape, just as the Wordsworth and Coleridges would have approved of. This remarkable old oak tree is probably over 900 years old. It's absolutely stunning to look at and to see and to imagine all that it has seen. And it is thought that it was planted from an acorn by another really old oak, so it's what's called a beacon tree. It's been standing here for over 900 years. It is wonderful to think that William and Dorothy and the Coleridges and their friends and acquaintances would very likely have sat under this very old oak tree and talked away and read their poems. So we return the 5 miles from Alfoxden to Nether Stowey, walking the path through the woods that Coleridge would have taken after visiting the Wordsworths. The Coleridges left their cottage in Nether Stowey in September 1799 and settled in the Lake District to be near the Wordsworths. Thomas Poole moved to the old house in Nether Stowey in 1802, and did everything to entice Coleridge back to his new home. "I've made a nice book room. I promise to get any books you want," he wrote to Coleridge. But although he visited a couple of times, Coleridge realised he wanted to remain settled near the Wordsworths in the Lake District.